Thanks, Jenna. So I've been having a great day. I've been listening to everyone's talk so far. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking. Okay, let's see if I can share my screen. Uh, there we go. Uh, I'm gonna hope for the best that everyone can see my slide. This is my favorite picture. Um, but yeah, looks good. Okay, so let's kick on. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining in to listen to my talk, How Do Communities Improve Quality? Just for a nice early reference for those of you taking notes, there is a slide at the end which will have all the links for all the references used in putting this together, and I'll be happy to share the slides afterwards if anybody wants them. So let's get started. So my name's Drew. That's me in the hat there. I work here. This is Feature Space in Cambridge in the UK. Although, like many people in the UK, I'm joining you from my house in Peterborough at the moment because we're all working from home again. In my spare time, I like to organise meetups. These two here specifically, the Ministry of Testing Cambridge and the Ministry of Testing Peterborough test communities. Oh. Now you'll notice there that I said communities instead of meetups. And you might think to yourself, you may yourself have been before or attended a tech meetup and found yourself pizza in one hand, warm beer in the other, being talked at by an overfamiliar recruiter in a branded polo shirt. And you might have thought to yourself, is this really a community? What value am I supposed to be getting out of this? Now, my view is those types of meetups are not communities. And I'm going to try and explain today what I actually mean by a community. So to start with, I'm going to tell you a story. Although this is my story, the next few slides that I'm going to use have graphics on by someone called Emily Webber. She tells a very similar story, and she has excellent excellent artwork for it. If you're at all interested in communities of practice, then I really recommend you go and check out Emily Webber because she really is the authority on the subject. Anyway, my story. This is the IT department that I joined my first step into the world of software testing. So as you can see here, there's 4 banks of desks. Those in the yellow are the business analysts. Those in the blue are the programmers. In the green is QA. One of those is me. And in the orange is the automation guys. Now, work would flow through these in a manner that you and I would immediately find familiar. The business analysts would do their bit, they'd pass it to the developers, they'd do their bit, they'd pass it to us testers, then we'd pass it to the automation guys in something we'd all recognize as waterfall. Now, people are often surprised when I say that this was perhaps the happiest time in my professional career as a tester. At the time, I was working with a very small, close-knit group of other testers. We were learning together. We were growing together. We were all like-minded, focused on our task of testing and doing it as good as we could possibly do. Now, from a business perspective, and certainly from a customer's perspective, it's not a brilliant setup because obviously right now we're all focused on our individual tasks, not focused on deliver great features or great products. Now, the business obviously noticed that too. They heard of this thing called Agile, and we ended up working in multidisciplinary teams. So as you can see now, each bank of desks has been mixed up, and what we're doing now is we're all, instead of focused on just a group of people doing a particular task, we're now focused all working towards delivering a better product. So this is good. This is a more effective way of working. Let's try that bit again. We deliver better customer outcomes. However, on a personal level, I found myself feeling quite lonely because on my team, I was the only person looking at the problems I was tackling with my perspective and through the prism of my own values. And I have to be honest, I found that I wasn't, although we were delivering better software and there's satisfaction in that, I didn't enjoy it quite as much. And I found that I was losing focus on the task of testing, which is what I had been doing before. From an organization or a team point of view, this also has its own problems because when somebody leaves the team, either off sick for a period of time or moves on to a new role, they were the only one who knew how to do that particular role in the team. There was nobody else who was familiar with that bit of code, what they were doing. So we had a gap in the knowledge, and we had to then work out how we were going to backfill that. The organization noticed this too, so they made the next step. The next step was they introduced programs. And what that meant was they grouped similar teams working on similar problems with other teams to share the burden and reduce from the risk of single points of failure. So this tackled some of my problem. So I'm no longer alone. I'm grouped with another couple of QAs who are doing a similar role to me, and similarly the automation, the developers and the business analysts have that too. This is much better. However, there is still a problem. And the problem is that these programs, they share, as in the shared disciplines within them, begin to optimize and work out how to do their task as effectively as possible. And they begin to diverge from the other programs, and they begin to silo their knowledge and the information. And organizationally, you end up with multiple approaches across your business and multiple solutions to similar problems, and an ultimately unoptimized way of working. So lastly, we finally stumble on what I believe the answer to be. So across the whole department in our case, but across the organization, depending on your size, we set up communities of practice. And these communities of practice span across all teams and programs. They bring like-minded individuals together to perform these maintenance and growth activities that we can only do when we share with other people 3 general commonalities. Now those there we go. So the 3 areas that the members of the most successful communities of practice share are a common domain. So it could be an interest in testing, quality, or an approach to automation. A common practice, so that might be a common tool, a coding language, or even a shared code base. And lastly, a common sense of community and actually being and feeling part of a collective and experiencing things together, as opposed to just being an individual in a room full of other individuals. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, okay, well, this is all good, but what's the value to me and to my business? Our systems have documentation, we give good training. Why do I need to have a community when we already have all our knowledge stores written down? What a good question. There are a number of reasons why communities of practice exceeds anything that's possible simply by documenting and training. And we're going to start here. This is the knowledge iceberg. Now imagine for me, if you will, any piece of documentation relating to a system you work with. Perhaps it tells you how to set up the config of the product you produce, maybe the code standards for the automated test code, or maybe it's the naming conventions for individual test cases. Now, this is explicit knowledge. This is knowledge that is known, that we can say out loud, and we can document. Now think about how often you complete that task and how little of what it actually takes to complete that task is in the documentation. Does it tell you, for example, how to work with the difficult code that we don't touch? Does it tell you how to do the little workarounds that the guy who spent a whole sprint working on and discovered how to work around it? Does it tell you the annoyances that crop up when you try and do the same process but you use a Mac? This is implicit knowledge or tacit knowledge, the stuff that we just know and that's never in the documentation. It's the stuff that managers lose sleep about and worry that they're going to lose when their experienced people go off sick or they find new jobs. It's the stuff that's hard to quantify, and it's even harder to keep up to date in documentation. Now, the reason communities of practice help manage and mitigate this is they're focused on learning together and supporting each other. Now, there are times for individuals where they come together to be part of a group that is focused on growth, not just focused on delivery. Now, again, I'm going to reference a model that's put forward by Emily Webber, mainly as it's the one that I use myself when working with communities, and as of yet, I've been unable to find anything to improve on it. Now, Emily recommends at a cadence that's decided and agreed upon by the community that to ensure you're covering everything, you cycle through these 5 categories with sessions focused on learning. So, as it suggests, learning new things, building skills and capability, sharing and critiquing, so discussing challenges and giving feedback to each other on how to solve them, creating better practices, so looking at community level solutions, community maturing, so again, improving, doing those maintenance and improving things for the benefit of the community. And lastly, actually just having a bit of a break and having a bit of fun together. Now, I found that by using this framework, communities, organizations are able to grow faster and more consistently retain knowledge across teams than those who have just relied on having documentation or using their general teams to learn and to build knowledge. Instead, communities help draw out the implicit knowledge for everyone who's part of it. So the question would be, why is that? And it's because when we're a community, we support each other and we help to solve each other's problems. And in this way, what we're effectively doing is we're crowdsourcing experience. We're drawing on the experiences of those facing and tackling the same but different problems that we are ourselves, and together we can achieve success faster. And I really do mean that. Whatever it is that you're working on, it's unlikely that you're going to be the first or the only one across your organization to have faced those challenges that you are now. And it's not just me and my opinions that tell you this. There are actual real life specialists out in the field who've studied this and found this to be true. So let's take Alex Pendleton, for example, who's a professor of human dynamics at MIT, and his studies have shown that organizations where people talk to each other across different groups are more successful than those that don't. Why? Because when we share our knowledge across groups and with other people, we and our teams and our organizations, we become more resilient to problems and challenges that we might face. Now, all of this is well and good, but I want to talk about what I believe is the most important benefit to communities of practice. I would like to talk about loneliness, and I'd like to talk about combating loneliness. Before you decide that you don't need to listen to this bit, or you want to and go to start checking your emails, please bear with me. This is the most important 5 minutes of the talk. So, people on multidisciplinary teams are at risk of loneliness, an elevated risk of loneliness, and I've already mentioned. And I'm going to explain to you why that's bad. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm going to explain why it's bad for the individuals on your team and the teams themselves, why that's bad. I've already mentioned that the only person looking at a problem or a feature or whatever from your perspective can be an isolating experience. And it's true. Teams are made up of different specialists so that they bring their skills together to help deliver fantastic products. You're supposed to think differently to the other people on your team because that means that you can bring value that no one else can. This is a double-edged sword, of course, as depending on your team, it doesn't take a lot for the necessary constructive conflict required to be effective and to deliver great products to actually become draining, to become exhausting, and actually become damaging to your team members' potential well-being. All of us at one time or another have found ourselves working in hard, high-stress environments. That might be because of delivery pressure, conflict at work, or senior management induced stressful situations. Human beings have a tendency towards behaving in a certain way. Now, I've recently finished reading The Happiness Advantage, where the author talks about this and how when we're stressed, our instincts are to withdraw, to isolate ourselves from our colleagues, our friends, our families, to knuckle down and pull an all-nighter, or to burn the candle at both ends, and to deliver and get everything over the line. And when we do this, we take that toll on ourselves. And what do we get in return? We get a shifting baseline of what we're capable of and what we're expected to achieve and to deliver, and another project that's dumped on our desks, when what we really ought to be doing is we ought to be recovering from that extra burn that we've taken and replenishing our needs. Now, if this behavior is left unchecked, this can lead to a state or condition called languishing. Now, some of you may have heard of languishing, and you may have heard it recently referred to as the COVID condition. And that's because for many of us, COVID and the global pandemic has either brought about or exacerbated the levels of stress in our lives. And many of us find ourselves in this position. Now, languishing is considered by psychologists to just be shy of the scale for men. Let me try and say that again. It's considered to be just shy of a mental health issue by psychologists. It can be described as not quite being depressed, but feeling empty and unsatisfied by things that previously gave you satisfaction. There's a feeling that nothing is actually wrong in particular, but you're just not able to do your best work. So why am I telling you this? Well, because when we're up against it at work, what's the first thing that we do? We skip the personal development time. We'll skip a lunch break. We'll grab a quick coffee and head back to our desks rather than take advantage of those water cooler moments that every management guidebook tells you is crucial to the effectiveness of your business. We all rush and we all buckle down and we just get on with things. And all of this takes its toll on our well-being and that of our friends and our colleagues, our teams, and ultimately our performance and our organization's performance. Now, the reason that communities of practice are so important, especially now, is that after the opportunity is that they offer an opportunity to be a little oasis and that we need in order to cross the desert. They help us to keep going when we're surrounded by like-minded and empathetic individuals, so that we do not actually feel like we're struggling as we're having to struggle on alone. Oh wow, I've rattled through that quick. Okay, well, I've actually come to the end, so I'm going to quickly wrap this up. So, if you take nothing else from our time together today, there's a couple of things that I want you to remember. So they are these. So communities of practice help the passionate and motivated people who you work with or you associate with thrive. They help retain, enhance, and evolve the knowledge within your teams and organizations. Now more than ever, a multidisciplinary team is not quite enough to deliver the fantastic products that we want to, and saying that is okay. We shouldn't be afraid to say that. And lastly, as the old proverb goes, if you want to go far, go together. So it's time to end. As promised, here's a list of all the resources used by me when putting these slides and opinions together. I'll leave it up on the screen for a few moments if anyone wants to take a screenshot or take notes. Thanks for taking the time to listen to me today. Obviously, if you've got any questions, I'd love to try and answer them for you. Thank you very much. Oh.
Yeah, there you are, Drew.
Sorry, Jenna, I finished a bit quick there.
Oh no, it's totally fine. It takes a second for the app to push people live. That was a beautiful talk. I know you feel like you went through it faster than you planned, but really it's so impactful at just the right time, because I think a lot of folks are struggling a little bit, both with isolation due to lockdowns and isolation in the roles that we're in, And like I said, I love communities in practice. Like, I've
Uh,
used them. I believe in it. I'm a member of MOT. So,
yeah.
all the
Um,
things.
Thank you. That's very kind. Um, if nobody's got any questions, I mean, I am very thorough. I'm not surprised nobody's got any questions. But whenever I talk about communities of practice, the question that always comes up is, how do you measure their effectiveness? If I forgot a few minutes, I had some thoughts prepared that I cut out because I didn't think I'd have enough time. So I'd love to share those with you, because there's always somebody who wants to know about how we measure things. So you'll have to forgive. I haven't got any slides for this, but if you are in a management position, or you are someone responsible for a community of practice, you are invariably asked, how do we justify the value that we get from them? How do we measure the success? Now, obviously, this is a really tough question to answer, and that's why it's always the question that gets asked. I've spent the past year really focusing and trying to learn more about OKRs and metrics, which has left me being a very dull boy, I'm afraid. However, what I encourage people to think about now when they're starting a community of practice is, one of the first things you should do is you should unite behind a goal or a purpose or a mission that you are trying to do. Now, every piece of literature says that you should think about a goal, because your goal is your thing that you unite behind, and your point of unity and commonality. But if you think about that as your as an output metric, something that you can measure and you can observe, but you can't control. So your measure might be, we want to feel closer as a team or a community, or we want to build better software practices. That you can't really measure, you can't really control that, but you can observe it happening. What you should combine that with is relevant input metrics. So things on their own that don't necessarily result in that thing occurring or thing overall improving. But if you're seeing an uptick in 4 or 5 different input metrics, such as lots of people come to our communities of practice session, we have them regularly, we see things taken from the communities of practice sessions back to our teams, and we can count those things. Alone, they don't mean anything, but when they're pulled together, those can be the things that help you quantify the value that you're bringing and how you're shifting the needle by using those things. I can't believe I just used the phrase shifting the needle in public, I'm afraid, but it's all the metrics I've been looking at. So that's something that's always of interest to people. So hopefully it was today as well.
So you are the second person to use that today. So you
Oh,
are
no.
not alone. You're in good company.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that you mention kind of having a goal and developing metrics around it, because most of my community of practice, other than administrative testing, experience has been within organizations. So I was with a major US insurance company. I was there for like 3 years. And I was helping to really make accessibility a priority. So we had some developers who were passionate about it, some testers who were passionate about it, some product and business folks that were passionate about it. And from the testing side, I took the lead and we developed a community of practice. And our first goal was that we were going to roll out guidance. Here is some documentation on using the tools
Yeah.
that are being brought in. Here is, since it was a risk-based organization, here is a risk workbook based on accessibility. These are our priorities because we can't do it all at once. The
Yeah.
WCAG is a very, very long
Yeah.
checklist, essentially. So what are our primaries? What's our central focus as our MVP for now? Because dozens of systems. And we measured against a timeline that we developed. This is our timeline for building the guiding documents. This is our timeline for working with teams. So I think it's really interesting that we really took that same approach.
Yeah.
But we had a very specific goal and focus, and it was very narrow. And it, of course, can get much, much bigger.
Yeah, it's funny you say you started with focusing on accessibility, because it's one of those subjects who they're real. If I were to just make a statistic up and just pull it out of the air, I imagine we'd be surprised at how many communities of practice, particularly in the quality or the software industry, kick off around accessibility, because generally speaking, people who care about accessibility really care about accessibility, and that lends itself to that shared purpose very, very easily. And it's also really easy to see it be effective, because if you really care about something, you leave those community sessions and you bang the drum back in your team and you make a noise about that thing that you care about, because you're surrounded by other people who care about it. Security is another one that I see happens quite a lot, because people who care about security really, really care about it. So, and yeah, they're real hot houses for communities of practice and all that good stuff that comes with them.
I think you see a lot of communities of practice. Actually, let me take a step back. I think you see a lot of testers specifically becoming deeply, deeply engaged in accessibility, because testing at its heart is about empathy.
Yes.
And accessibility at its heart is about empathy. So we're built for this. This is who we are, even if we don't necessarily realize it. And to some respect, security is about empathy too. It's a much more technical kind of empathy, that we care deeply about, like the security of the code as opposed to the user's experience. But part of that comes from this empathy around the user not being vulnerable, around the business not being vulnerable. Now you can say, like, do we need empathy for the company? But like, there's a certain amount of empathy that goes into that. So I don't know, I got off track, but
yeah, I just remembered we're being recorded. We're talking. I was lost in it for just completely. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I could talk about it for hours. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, I do see that somebody was very appreciative. They said that this is an absolutely cool performance, a lot of really cool, important stuff.
Thank you. That's very kind.
I agree. So many great takeaways in what you had to say.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, if anybody is interested in talking further, or would like to hear more, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I do have a relatively distinctive name. I'd be happy to connect and happy to talk more.
Fantastic. Well, I hope to see you again.
Yes, I hope so too. Yes.